We're going to start in Exodus. Actually, I'm going to start in Exodus chapter 11, verse 4, and then we'll read through the end of chapter 12. So it starts from 4. And Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I'm going to go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. But against any of the sons of Israel a dog shall not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants will come down to me and bow themselves before me, saying, Go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out." And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my words will be multiplied in the land of Egypt." And Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month they are each one to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them, according to what each man should eat, and are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. And they shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, but its head and its legs along with its entrails. And you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left until morning you shall burn with fire. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now, this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from that first day until the 7th, that person shall be cut off from Israel. And on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the 7th day. No work at all shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone you may be prepared for you. You shall also observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your host out of the land of Egypt, and therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is an alien or a native of that land. You shall not eat anything leavened, In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go, take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the door of none of you shall go outside the door of this house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your house and smite you. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. And it will come about when you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he has promised, that you shall observe this rite. And it will come about when your children will say to you, What does this rite mean? That you shall say, It is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes. And the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. And it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, Rise, get up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go. Worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and go and bless me also. And the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in cloths on their shoulders. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So they let them have the request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children, and a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with the flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. And they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened since they were driven out of Egypt, and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years, and it came about at the end of 430 years to the very day that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be observed for the Lord, for having brought them out from the land of Egypt. This night is for the Lord to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout their generations. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner is to eat of it, but every man's slave purchased with money after you have circumcised him, then he may eat of it. A sojourner or a hired servant shall not eat of it. It is to be eaten in a single house. You are not to bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All the congregation of Israel are to celebrate this, but if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near to celebrate it. And he shall be like a native in the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. The same law shall apply to the native as to the stranger who sojourns among you. Then all the sons of Israel did so. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, and it came about on that same day that the Lord brought the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. That's a lot of reading. And that is a lot of... So we'll probably be in this chapter a while. We'll try to get through the first 13 verses today, but I do hope you'll have some input today. Okay, let's start with Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Well, 1 and 2. I'll read 1 and 2. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you." So, hence the calendar handouts. Tishri, up to this point, is the first month of their year. So Tishri. In fact, I've just found this interesting when we were studying Genesis, that Tishri 1:1, that's when they believe God began, let there be light, and there was light, and there was evening and morning the first day. They believe that was Tishri 1:1. And that started the calendar, and that's how they celebrate that, the beginning. It's in the fall. And even to this day, they have the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. It'll fall in Tishri. It'll be in the fall, and it'll be in Tishri. And you can see that September, October. And so this is called their civil calendar. And it was their calendar from the beginning until this point, the only calendar they had. So anything we read prior to that, to this point, is going to be based on that. Then this is going to be the beginning of it's called their sacred calendar. And so kind of makes it confusing when you read the rest of the New Testament, because they do have two calendars. And it explains it here. The civil calendar is the official calendar of kings and births and contracts. But the sacred calendar is where the festivals are computed. So they kind of have two first years. And then you can skip down and see it's Nisan on your calendar, March, April. And that was the 7th month, and now it's going to be the 1st. This is when we have Passover, Easter, it's our spring. And it's interesting that here it's called Nisan. And are you all doing Ezra and Nehemiah in Sunday school? Have you been at Ezra and Nehemiah? Okay, I just thought it was so interesting Sunday, because he got word that things were bad in Jerusalem in Kislev. And it wasn't until Nisan that he approached the king. So he had 4 months. And you can tell in his response to the king, he was so well thought out. So those 4 months, he had 4 months to think and come up with a plan. But anyway, it's all right there. But sometimes, so as Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther, they use Nisan. But other places you're going to see, it's called Adar, A-D-A-R. Oh, wait, no, I said that wrong. Aviv. A-B-I-B or A-V-I-V. A-B-I-B. Abib. And Abib means tender, tender as in a fresh young barley. Like, it's the month of ear forming is what they called it. So it's the fall, and it has to do with their harvest. And then Nisan means their flight. So sometimes it'll be Abib or Aviv. Sometimes it'll be Nisan. But it's the same. That is their new first month for their civil calendar, or for their sacred calendar. It starts with Nisan. So, FYI. And I mean, this is really, like I said, that's why I pulled it, was to look at and studying Nehemiah. I wanted to see how long that was, and I thought, oh, the ladies could use this. So now you have a visual. So now this month, and I also thought about, of course, all of this is pointing to Christ. I think it's so obvious. It's all pointing to Christ. But when he came, at his birth, the calendar was also changed. So I just thought about that last night. It also changed the calendar. I know when my dad taught school, every day he'd write the day on the board, and he'd say, 2015. 2015 years since what? And he'd just, always say that. Okay, and then, so, verse 3. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are to each one take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's household. A lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbors nearest to his house are to take one, according to the number of persons in them. According to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be unblemished, a male, a year old, and may take it from the sheep or the goats. And then you keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. And so this first original Passover, they're going to do it in family units. And the dad is kind of acting the dad is the head of the household, and so he's acting in that role. Later, we'll have the law and the temple and the priesthood, and so later they'll make it as it'll always remain a family event, and you eat it with your family. But then they'll when they get the temple and the priesthood in place, they will have, and this is going to be relevant in a minute, but they will have I don't want to say symbolic, but they will have a Passover lamb, like nationally. And the high priest will bring it in and put it in the temple courts. And so it does later. And it's one of the feasts where they all had to travel to Jerusalem. So I don't know all the dynamics of all traveling to Jerusalem and having a family Passover, but they did that. And so notice that they bring it in on the 10th of the month. So on the 10th day, they'll bring the lamb in, but they don't slaughter the lamb until the 14th. And it had two purposes. One is inspecting it thoroughly, making sure it's a year-old lamb without blemish. And, okay, well, I'll get there in a minute. So they do that. But then the other thing is to connect with the sacrifice. Like, is a sacrifice if it doesn't cost you anything? It doesn't mean anything. So this is going to be a meaningful sacrifice. I think John MacArthur even called it like a pet, like you would bring it into your home like a pet, and you would connect with the sacrifice.
So this would be something like the kids, I can just see what my kids,
yes.
and they would remember it forever. It would be a big sacrifice for the whole family.
It's a huge sacrifice. It's a huge, yes. It would be. And the other thing that makes this such a huge sacrifice, I don't know, but what I understand, if a farmer or a shepherd has a lamb without blemish, that is huge. I mean, that's what you want. And that's the one you want to keep and breed, and that represents your future flock. And so for the father to sacrifice a prized lamb. So when 1 Peter calls, which we'll look at it in a minute maybe, but calls, we were redeemed with the precious blood of the lamb. I mean, it is precious on so many levels, even in this context. It would have meant their future flocks. It was a huge sacrifice, sacrifice on the part of the kids, because they would have connected. And so you have this lamb, and you bring it in. So for 4 days, you connect with your sacrifice and inspect it for blemishes. Okay, and then, and I don't know. A take from the sheep or the goats.
Yeah, if it was a goat, I wouldn't want that in my house for 7 days.
I know. They probably all picked lambs for that reason. I don't know. So they would bring it in, and you'd keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. So every male patriarch, head of their household, would take this lamb that the kids have named, take it out and make that sacrifice. They all would do it at the same time. And the other thing I wanted you to see on this is this twilight. This is so interesting. If you'll notice on your handout, it has the Jewish day was from sunset to sunset. So at sunset, the date, like for us, the date changes at midnight. But for them, it would change at sunset. As soon as it's sunset, it's a new day. And that's why in Genesis, it's evening and then morning, the first day. And so, I know, it's so interesting. And then, okay, so you see it's divided into 8 parts. So the first part, it does their evening. And then you get down, it has the first watch, and it's sunrise to 9 a.m. And then the second watch is 9 to noon. And then the third watch is noon to 3. And the fourth watch would be 3 to sunset, and then it's a new day. And so, as soon as the sun hits noon, it begins its descent. So they would consider that evening. Anytime it starts the descent, that's evening. And so their third and fourth watch were also known as the minor evening, is noon to 3. Major evening is 3 to sunset. So this word twilight literally translates between the evenings. So it would be between the minor evening and the major evening, which would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is going to be very significant. We'll get to the New Testament part. So so at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so you've inspected it. The dad takes it out and kills the lamb, and then they would begin to roast it. And so
I feel bad for those poor kids. They're not going to eat anything that
I
day.
know, exactly. I know. That thought crossed my mind. Yeah, they would not. They would have a hard time eating it. So all of Israel would slaughter the lamb at twilight.
It's interesting that according to the calendar that God gave them, and then even how He set up the day, it's like He started at the fullness of both.
Yes.
You know, at the harvest time, you know, when it's the best time of year, you know, you've got a lot to eat, the weather's warm. Same thing with the day. You know, His day started in the evening today, which is sort of opposite for what we do.
I know, exactly, isn't it? We start in our New Year's in the middle of the dead of winter. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, so verse 7, moreover, you shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintels of the house in which they eat it. So the head of the household, the father, is going to take, we'll read later, it's the hyssop, and they'll dip it in the blood, and they'll do it across the top of the doorpost and then the two sides. So you have that. And they would put that. You know, I just left out so much stuff. We're going to go, before we get there, let's talk about this, and we're going to bring it to the New Testament, because all of this is pointing to Christ, and we do not want to miss that, because Lord made me think of one thing I wanted to really point out. So when we get to the New Testament, I can't remember what verses I get, but in Matthew 21, okay, just picture this. Matthew 21, Jesus has this big triumphal entry. Like, in my head, I like to think that these two events are taking place simultaneously, but we don't know. But we know they're close. They could be a day apart, or we don't know, depending on when Passover was. But, so on the 10th day of the month, the high priest would take the lamb, and they have just fields where they're just specifically for the high priest to offer sacrifices, where they raise these sheep. He would go pick a sheep from the flock and bring it into the temple courts to be inspected. Well, I don't know if this happened simultaneously, but just they could be a day apart. I don't know. But so the high priest is bringing the lamb into the temple, and then here comes Jesus, his triumphal entry, and it's all happening about the same time. And he's entering into Jerusalem. He goes straight to the temple and starts clearing it out. And then, as you read the scriptures, it's so intense. They're trying to. This is the week of his crucifixion, and so it's intense. Did I put in there Matthew 21 to read?
7.
Okay, now we're gonna do 21 first.
You have John 19 in there first.
Okay, well we're gonna do Matthew 21 first.
Matthew 21.
Yeah, just put that in notes. It's just so. Oh. I want to read this together. So Matthew 21, and we can start in verse 9. He's coming in, and the multitudes going before him, and those who followed were crying out, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And when he had entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, Who is this? And the multitudes were saying, This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. Jesus entered the temple, cast out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, overturned the tables and the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you're making it a robber's den. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priest and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he had done, and the children who were crying out in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became indignant. So they're furious. First of all, the whole money changer, den of robbers thing, and then he's healing, and they're just insane, irrational jealousy. So we're going to see a very intense time in Jesus' ministry, trying to trip him up, trying to find fault in him. And as the lamb, Passover lamb, is in the temple courts being inspected, so is Christ. And so then, that's why I love this passage in John. My New Year's resolution is to not be dramatic. I'm trying so hard not to be dramatic. I know. Okay, John 19, 1 through 6. This is so good. I know, I get so. So John 19, 1 through 6. This is after the arrest. And then Pilate, therefore, took Jesus, scourged him, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, arrayed him in a purple robe, and they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they gave him blows to the face, and Pilate came out again, and he said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Jesus, therefore, came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." And therefore the chief priests and the officers saw him. They cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The other translation says, "no fault." It's just like he's been under this most intense, they're mocking him, they've clothed him, they're hitting him, they're scourging him for no reason, and yet Pilate comes out and he says he's blameless. There's no fault in him. Like he's declaring, here's your Passover lamb, and he's without fault. He's been inspected so severely and found to be without fault. And Pilate's the one who announced it. I just think that's so, just the ironies of that. And then we have Matthew 27.
Wasn't Pilate a Roman judge?
Yes, he was, which is why he was telling you crucifying, because I find no fault in him. And then in 27, we see him actually on the cross. 27:45. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce his words. So Matthew 27:45. Now from the 6th hour darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, that is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Okay, I just wanted you to see this. Oh wait, let me keep reading. And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, this man is calling for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran, taking a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put the reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come and save him." And Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. So I wanted you to see this, the 6th hour to the 9th hour. So in verse 45, again, when you look at your calendars, so now we're under the Roman rule, and what they did is, so when the sun starts coming up, sunrise, which is about our 6 a.m., they would count forward to the 9th hour, which the 6th hour would have been noon, would have become dark until the 9th hour, which is 3. So if you can just picture Christ on the cross giving up his spirit at the same time, or the day after, or before, I don't know. But anyway, the Lamb of God being crucified, and then the Lamb, the Passover Lamb, just all taking place at the same time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just, so
they had their national sacrifice.
Yes, yes, both for Israel and then for all mankind, yes, and both ones. But one
it's
actually
interesting too. If you don't have a lamb, you can share with your neighbor. Well, the Gentiles and Jews.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. We're gonna cover that. That is so. Which he covers that at the end of the chapter. Yes, it's so good. So then, okay, let's go back to our passage in Exodus 12. And I just have so much I want to say, and it's just not it's just going to come out like rambly, but okay, so let's look at this. So moreover, in Exodus 12:7, moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintels of the house, which they will eat. Okay, this is like so. We're going to cover more of our actual salvation and propitiation next week because I can't wait, but I didn't think I had time today, so we'll cover it next week thoroughly. But this blood, do I have Hebrews 11:28? I think let's use God's words first. Hebrews 11:28. Did I put that in your notes there? I think I moved it. I know, but now it's like, no, it fits there. 11:28. And we may read it again at the end. Hebrews 11:28. So by faith, this is talking about Moses. By faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn might not touch them. So it is an act of faith that he sprinkles this blood. It was an absolute act of faith. So what Moses is saying when he obeys this, when he follows through, it's when we looked at the hailstorm earlier in Exodus, and he said, if you fear the word of the Lord, you're going to get your livestock and your servants out of the field. If you don't fear the Lord, then I guess you're going to leave them there and they're going to die. And it's kind of the same thing. So when Moses hears this, he believes God. When God says, I'm going to pass through Egypt and kill every firstborn, Moses believes him. And then he says, but I'll accept. So every household is going to have a death. Every firstborn must die. Okay, let me try to say. No, it's going to come wrong. No exceptions. I mean, isn't it interesting that Israel has to make a sacrifice? He doesn't say, oh, well, you're Moses and you're my people, so no death in your family. There are no exceptions. The destroyer's coming. Every firstborn is going to die. That's God's justice. It applies across the board. He's just. He's a just and righteous God, and his word applies across the board. In his mercy, he makes a provision, and he's going to accept the blood of the lamb in place of the firstborn. So every household is going to experience death. He's just, no exceptions. The law applies. In his mercy, he's made a provision to accept the death of a lamb in the stead of your firstborn.
So do you think the Pharaoh or any of the Egyptians knew about that, or did Moses just tell the Israelites?
I think he just told the Israelites, but I don't know. I don't know. Okay. It's just, I don't know. Let's see what
it
the
makes me curious if any of the Egyptians tries that.
I know. Yeah. But, yeah, I don't, so what does it say? I don't know. I just know
they might have come and stayed with the Egyptians.
Well, we're going to see here they had servants that they had purchased. They had non-Jewish people living in their home, and absolutely, they could be spared. So we'll look at that more next week. But I just want you to see the law applies. Like, we do not, which we've seen a lot in the news lately, unjust judges. Like, it's so wrong. And it's, we get frustrated when you see a judge, when someone's committed a crime and they let them go. Or they make exceptions to the law. Like, no, the law is the law. And that's why God is so just. It is so just. When he says the wages of sin is death, that's across the board. There are no exceptions. However, in his amazing mercy, he will accept a sacrifice in our stead. And this is consistent. We saw it first in Genesis 3 when he clothed Adam. Instead of them dying, he clothed them in garments. Genesis 22 when we're introduced to Jehovah Jireh. And I've heard that term misused. It doesn't mean God is our provider. It doesn't mean he's going to provide you with a new car or a mansion or whatever, health, wealth, and prosperity. That is not what Jehovah Jireh means. It's in the context of he will provide, and he will provide a sacrifice for our sins. death is required. Every time we sin, death is required. But in His mercy, He will accept a sacrifice in our stead. And so that's what this sprinkling of the blood was. We're offering a lamb in the place of our firstborn. It's just so merciful that He does that. Okay, and then verse 8. And they shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Now, this is interesting too, because they would have spent some time roasting the lamb, and they actually ate it on the 15th because the time changed at sunset. So they'd roast the lamb and then bring it in and eat that same night. And then, you know.
I can't imagine how bad that tasted because they cooked it with everything in it.
Well, I didn't read about this. They would take all the intestines out and wash them and clean them.
And then put them back in and cook them? Okay, because I thought they just...
Yeah, no.
It said they ate the head too.
Yes, everything. But okay, but let's look at this picture. So the lamb is whole, and it's on there, and you just feel the sacrifice. It's not lamb stew. It's the lamb, and you just feel the sacrifice.
Well, they had nurtured it until that point, so they controlled what it ate.
Yes.
And it had been fed probably the best they had.
Mm-hmm.
How would you control the goat?
No, you don't. Okay. Okay, so they shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire. And then he goes on in verse 9, not raw and not boiled. And the idea is that the whole it's the whole. So to boil it, they would have had to cut it. Of course, raw was not kosher for anything. So it had to be roasted with fire and served whole. And then, of course, the unleavened bread. And obviously, we're going to talk about this next week more because it's all the text talks about. But, so the unleavened bread, just for this, so on one level, I don't know how to say it, on one level, like just the pure historic teachable moment of this. They're going to have to leave in such haste, and so they don't have time to put the leaven in the bread and let it rise. So when they have this Passover meal, and he's going to say later, eat it in haste. When they celebrate Passover today, it's long. If you've ever been to a Passover Seder, it's long. But everything is a teaching point. This is so huge in Israel's history, and it's so huge in ours because it's pointing to our deliverer. It's so huge. And even like in the book of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah prays, he rehearses this. You read all throughout the Psalms, this is huge. Their deliverance is huge. The psalmist talks about just being on his bed and thinking God's not even hearing me. And then he begins to remember God's amazing works and wonders and what he did for Israel and setting them free from the Egyptians. And it's just meant to be an encouragement. It's just a huge, huge event in the life of Israel.
Is that what this is, a Seder?
Today it's called the Passover Seder.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because my dad, when he was living, he was a pastor, he used to do a Seder meal for the Indian church we went to.
Really? Yeah. It is like God is so, like he knows us so well, and he knows how we learn.
You do it sometime right before Easter.
Yeah, that's when it takes place. It's the Easter, right around Resurrection. And so everything is teachable, everything is purposeful, and it's teachable. And so they're going to have this unleavened bread, and then the kids are going to ask, well, why is the bread flat? Why is it unleavened? And he's going to explain, because we had to leave in such haste. And then the bitter herbs. I don't know, did I put Deuteronomy in there? Deuteronomy 16:3. Yes, wrong one. This number's Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 16:3. It should be in the notes. So Deuteronomy 16:3. You shall not eat leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread. And then he calls it the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, in order that you may remember all the days of your life, the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. He does not want them to forget this moment. And so the bread. So when they would eat the flat bread, it was the bread of their affliction. It'll prompt the parents to tell how bitter it was, and we know. Like, it's not going to take them long. They're going to be in the middle of the wilderness, and they're going to long to go back, and they're going to forget the bitterness. But we have it in writing, and we can read. I mean, the Pharaoh was so cruel, and he did it to make their lives bitter, and he just kept heaping more and more burden on them, and with less and less help, they were bitter, and a bitter life, and that was exact words that he used. They made their life bitter. And so this is going to remind them, and the kids are going to ask, and I think it's like a horseradish thing that they actually eat. Mm-hmm. It clears out your sinuses and everything. And so they're, oh, why do we have to eat this? So we never forget the bitterness that we experienced in our bondage. And then,
well, that's why we have unleavened bread for our
yes, and we're going to get there. Yes, it's so good. It's just so, God's Word is so perfect. And
I was just wondering, in the Gospels it talks about the unleavened bread being symbolic of a life without sin. So does that tie into this?
Yes, absolutely. And we'll cover unleavened bread more next week. But yes, it puffs up. He referred to the teaching of the Pharisees as leaven. Mm-hmm. It just puffs up. And I will tell you, every false religion, every false teaching, every false doctrine, it puffs us up. It feeds our flesh nature and our ego, and it puffs us up. And so we'll cover all this next week. I know, it's so good though. Okay.
I think I'm sorry.
Yes. No, please.
Just what you and I were talking about before class, just when kids are saved at a young age, and I know Abby's just turned 13, and she's like, I'm never going to have an exciting testimony.
Right.
And of course I'm like, be glad.
Yeah. Yes.
But sometimes I think it's almost harder,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if harder is the right word, but when you said never forget the bitterness we experience in our bondage. And not that after you're saved you still have things you're bondage and you have to keep turning over and over. But, I don't know. It's almost a blessing. I don't want that for my kids, but it kind of, your testimony is your blessing, and that you can look back and see, this is where I was, and this is where I came. I was saved in junior high, so I have a little bit of one, but still nothing like, I know when Yolanda was saved as an adult, we always were like, tell us more, because she was so excited and on fire.
I think it just gives you longer to appreciate what he's done for you, because when you're saved young, and you're still going to grow up and most likely make mistakes and do things that you're ashamed of, but then you can remember back how he paid that price, and it takes on more meaning.
Or he saved you. I keep telling you, you're going to be so glad you see what he
get
saved
to
you.
a certain
point,
but
Kelly,
you get
do
to a
not.
certain age and a certain point, and you look back and you go, okay, well, it's not an exciting testimony, but look at what I could have been.
Thank God I didn't have to go
I could have been.
through
You
that.
see certain people going down certain roads, and you're like, but
spared
if
me
I
from
hadn't
that.
been saved, I could have been doing that too, or I could have done this. Or
Right,
this
for
could
that
have happened.
protection.
Yeah.
And our
Protection.
kids are in such a desperate world that it's allowing her to be strong in her faith that she can witness to others.
Yeah.
But don't ever, like Dr. Lathan's been preaching on internal sins. Let me tell you, like, there's the prodigal son, which like spring break, Padre Island on spring break, prodigal son. And then there's the older brother. And I am so grieved to say I identified more with the older brother who did everything.
All of us that were probably saved at
Exactly.
young age.
Yes.
Exactly. That's me.
Yes.
You have like a sense of, I'm just being very honest.
Yes.
This is not me so much now, although we all probably struggle with it.
Yes.
But when you're raised in a Christian home, and I had the best of the best parents, and I was raised in the very best church, you have a little bit of that feeling of superiority. Please don't judge me for saying that. And I don't feel that way so much now, but I struggle with that growing up. And I don't think you can I mean, you can help it.
It's true.
But there's almost a part of you, if you grow up that way,
Yes.
you are going to wrestle with that.
Well, I can tell you, the older you
And
get,
I'm not judging anybody, and I don't feel that arrogance anymore. But,
No,
I
know what
you're
talking
we
about.
probably all
exactly
struggle with
right.
it.
We all, but I remember the
But
day will come
you
when you
do.
realize that
I was
Christ
gonna
kinda
say-
knocks you off
Right.
the pedestal.
And let me just tell you, I could go into a long story about how God has done that
yes, and He will humble
and
us.
showed me that. So
Yeah.
what?
And
What
when
you
you-
know, or what your parents, how they were, you need me, and He'll put circumstances in your
Yes.
life where you cannot rely on your
Yes,
upbringing.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you
And He will
mature.
humble you.
I will not talk about that in depth.
He will humble you beyond, and you'll think you have nothing more to be humbled, and He'll find more, and He will purge you. And you, I mean, I know for me, the older I get, just the more grossed out and repulsed I am. So to me, I think maybe it's easier if you're the prodigal son, because these are internal and they're so ugly.
But they don't
But
see,
they're
deniable.
deniable.
They don't seem as ugly
Yes.
as somebody who's
They're
on
much
drugs or
prettier.
whatever.
They're much
It
prettier.
doesn't make for a
Yeah.
dynamic
Private
sell
life.
out a
I was just
concert
thinking
hall.
about that yesterday.
Yes,
and
it's just
to me,
so
the
repulsive.
visual was like, those are the stains of sin. But then Christ washed those away, so we're just remembering the stain, and we don't. I mean, honestly, we don't need to even be focusing on the stain anymore. We need to be moving forward, and sometimes we
Right.
can let that
I'm
hinder
yes.
our growth and keep us there looking at what used to be a stain when it's nothing there.
Yeah.
And Satan wants to hold you there too.
He does. He does. You know, it's kind of like when you lose weight and you look in the mirror and you still look fat. You know,
Yeah.
you've got to actually. I'm honest. You know, I don't know if I've ever done that, but I have many times. But your perspective has to take on a different way. Your perspective has to change.
I know, but it's just like what we're talking about today. He is so just, in pride, like all those internal sins are so repulsive and so deserving of death. I mean, He can break us to the point that, like I said, you think you have nothing left, and then He breaks you some more, and just purging that gross, repulsive pride that we have. I mean, you can still feel that same broke. It may not sell out, a concert hall to hear your testimony.
But it becomes
But
more
it is so
overwhelming
real.
at the price He paid.
Yes, and you realize that was just as repulsive as
Well, I
it
think
just deserving of death.
I think
I
it's
think
important
that's part
when
of
we
getting
are
older.
raising our children
That's
that
the best
we encourage them to establish their own relationship, because I think some of that pride. Well, I think some of that pride comes from your parents' faith, and I think a lot of times you get knocked down that first time when you're no longer able to rely on your parents' discipline, and you're going to church on Sundays because you live in my household. Well, after you're out of their household,
Yeah.
are we still going to go? Are we still going to go? And so I think that's when a lot of times that pride kind of gets knocked over, is when you have to rely on your own and establish why do you believe it? Is it
Right.
just because that's the way you're raised?
Yes.
Or have you established your own?
And that's such a good thing, that kind of crisis of belief.
It
encounter.
is. It really is healthy. Keep reminding me. It's really healthy. It's really good when your kids go through this. Okay.
But they're going through it with the protection of His blood.
So, I mean, this whole substitution thing, like we'll look at it next week in Romans, but it's propitiation, and I'm just going to say this week in case you're not here next week. But like you've probably even heard it from me. I'm so sorry to say, but we use that justified, just as if I've never sinned. And I wanted to tell you why that's wrong and why I try not to say it. Even though it's catchy and
great in youth group. That is great in youth.
and it's so easy, and it's catchy and it's memorable. But the thing is, the implication is that once we're born again, poof, our sins just disappear. And no, they're stacking up, and they've got a price tag on it, and it's death. Like the wages of sin is death. So they didn't poof disappear. Somebody had to pay that price for us. That's propitiation, if I can say it. That's what it means. That's what that word means. I'm gonna look at it next week. It's a big word, but it just means it. Like they didn't poof disappear. Christ took them on Himself, and He paid the price in our place. And I said, "We'll look at it more thoroughly next week." But in case you're not here, just
And when you think of Him on the cross, I mean, and you have to take the cross very personally. And you
Yes.
think that every ugly thing you've ever thought or done, or you thought nobody else knew about, he knew. He was aware of it,
Yes.
and he was still there.
And I think it was when we were studying Revelation, and it just, the reality of every sin has the price tag of death. It's not like one death. It's like for every sin, life is required, and it's overwhelming. It's so big. And so, but they don't poof disappear. Somebody had to pay the price. Somebody had to die. And so here we're seeing that in the place of the firstborn, a lamb, sacrifice of a lamb was accepted in that place. And same way for you and I. In the place of our death, he accepted in his mercy. In his justice, the law applies and there are no exceptions because he is a true, righteous, just judge. And the law applies across the board without exception. But because he's so merciful, he will accept a substitute in our place.
It's every sin. I mean,
No.
it's every sin.
I
When
did-
I'm not submissive to he
Yes.
asked me to be submissive, and I'm so not. So
I mean, do you
know,
understand?
that's
We could just mount up the sins just to this point today. Like we could mount up our sins. I'm like, we would have to die
That's just
1,000
as ugly to him.
deaths.
Right. That's just
That's
as ugly to
awesome.
him as some of these
Yes.
sins that are more
Like the
visible.
biggies, right?
Yeah.
The biggies,
Right.
Yes,
So I just-
and those are easier to feel the conviction and the shame, and you can't deny them because they're like out there and everybody knows your reputation. But it's the internal ones that are. I love.
Sometimes you sin and you don't even know you're sinning.
I
I mean, the
know.
thoughts you have, and then you.
I
Then
know.
you look back.
I mean, I'm just saying. I've
Or if
probably
you're-
sinned more than I know.
I
In
know,
my
but
head.
not only
And
that,
part of
and
that
then
was
you're
frightening.
reading, and you realize, oh my goodness, when I did that, however many years ago, I did not realize that was so wrong. You know, it's just never ending.
Well, even if you just think about the big sins, you couldn't die
No.
often enough.
Right, just to say that everybody knows. That,
Yeah.
I know. Yes, it's just, it's overwhelming. And I love the picture of, and I think this is a Paul Washer example, but how the Old Testament uses leprosy, and it just eats away at the flesh. And he was a missionary, and he worked in a leper colony, and he just talked about when we try to earn our salvation through our righteous acts. He said it's like taking a leper who's oozing. He said, if you have a true leper, you can smell them coming. The rot and the pus and the bleeding and just eating at the skin. He said it was like taking someone plagued with leprosy and wrapping them in silk cloths and trying to make them presentable. That's our righteous acts. It's trying to cover this leprous, sinful, and fix them up and make them, what do they say, putting lipstick on a pig or something? You try to fix it up and make it presentable. And that's why all of our righteous acts are like filthy rags. It's trying to cover a leper, and it's just oozing through, and you can't prevent the smell, and it's just terrible. So that's such a good picture.
Scary thought is that in Revelations it talks about he has two books, a book
Yes.
of life and a book of deeds. He's recording all of our sins in a book.
Yeah, yes,
He's
he
like, oh,
is.
you did that, and you did that.
Yes, they are. Yes. Yes. And
I
then,
guess that's why they say every morning you get up and you die to yourself.
yes.
Why we need the book of life.
And that's why we need the book of life. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's. So where were we? Okay, verse 10. Oh wait, no, 9. So do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails. So this whole, you sit down at the Passover table, and there is a whole lamb. If it were lamb stew or lamb soup, you wouldn't feel the effects. I mean, this is a visual. He said God knows us so well because He made us. He knows how we learn. He knows what sticks, and this lesson needs to stick. And so they would do that. It makes such impression on the kids. And then verse 10, and you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left until morning you shall burn with fire. And we're going to see the same thing with the manna. On the Sabbath you gather it, and then you can't keep it till the next day. You would burn it. And then you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. so, they wore those long robes, and so the men would take the robe and tuck it in their belt so they could run. Their legs were free and they could run without the robe hindering their sandal. And I didn't realize this. I know in the Middle East or Far East, East Asia, that was a tradition that you don't wear your shoes in your house. And I didn't realize, but from what I read, they would not wear their shoes in the home or at the table. And so here he's saying, you put your feet on, you get your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Why do they have to eat it so fast?
Well,
So quickly and couldn't leave it?
this one, it's going to be fast because death is going to come through and all the wailing. Now, from this point forward, it's a long meal because it's so much teaching.
Right.
But this
time they had
night,
to
it was,
quick.
and so when they do it today, they'll still put on their shoes and gird their loins or whatever, be ready to go, but as a teachable moment. So the kids are saying, "Why are you
And
eating?"
so they had to eat with one hand
Uh-huh.
because they had their staff.
Yes. And I mean, it's just going to show the dramatic, like when God says, "I'm whom the sun sets free is free indeed." I mean, we're going to see that lived out here. I mean, they're going to go from being like 1 minute they're slaves and they're bound to Pharaoh, and then boom, it's go. It's just so fast from bondage to freedom like that. It's just instant. And so here's the picture that we get. And then I love this. It is the Lord's Passover, which is where we get the term. And then the very next verse are, I will go throughout the land of Egypt. These are just like polar opposite terms. I will go through Egypt, and to take every firstborn, I will pass over. Those are opposites, and it's painting a picture for us. So I will go throughout the land of Egypt on that night. I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And again, this is the picture of God's judgment. We've seen it back in Revelation. It talks about pouring out His wrathful strength. So we're seeing glimpses of that wrath and that judgment on sin. We're seeing glimpses. This is so restrained. When we get to Revelation, it's full strength. This is restrained. And He's going to pass through Egypt, take every firstborn, both man and beast, which I thought that was so interesting, man and beast. And all the gods of Egypt, on all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgment.
So if you were a firstborn and you had your first child, you both would go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No exceptions. And that's why I love the contrast when they take the greatest of the great men and contrast it with the lowest of the lowest women. I mean, you covered A to Z. No exception. Absolutely no exception. And then I love how he contrasts the gods of Egypt, and then he says, I am the Lord. He is sovereign. And it's like, where is your son God now? And it's just a great reminder in light of, things that are happening in the news and in the world, that there is absolutely no government power that can protect against the judgments of God. When He pours out His wrath, when He pours out His judgment, full strength or restrained, there is no government in the world that can protect its people from that. So, the blood of the Lamb. And then verse 13. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Okay. So, any input or thoughts or?
I think it's interesting how they use the blood to get the doorway like that, and way earlier on, Abraham, when he was, confirming with God that he was going to have lots of descendants, he had to pass through bleeding cows, like a doorway.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about the covenant?
The covenant, yeah.
Uh-huh.
How he
Yeah.
had to go through and get the blood on him, and
Well, right. God passed through. Abraham was sound asleep. But yes, and that is such a good point because that's, it's so much. But yes, I know.
Do you think they believed that Pharaoh would let them go? Because God told Moses and Aaron all this, but he didn't say, and I promise that Pharaoh will say, leave.
Well, he has already told them.
That
He
they
has,
would be, that
yes.
they would be.
He's,
That's true.
well, yeah,
He
in
did
fact,
say.
he says, let's see, he said, in chapter 11, verse 8, he says, all these servants will come down to me and bow themselves before me and say, go. You know, yeah, they've been told, in fact, the first time they were told was actually in Genesis 15, that they would be freed from this bondage. So I think by now, God's made a statement. I mean, I know, and I just so appreciate this because God is God, and He doesn't have to do anything. But He says it, and it's like He's building their faith. He's building, I don't want to say the wrong word, but like a reputation for Himself. Like what I say will happen, what I say will happen. But He's building that before He says, trust me. I mean, He's making Himself known. So He's not saying trust a God you've never seen. I mean, He's demonstrated His sovereignty, His trustworthiness. I mean, everything
I
He
think
says.
that's what God does today.
He does, because He's so good. He's so kind and compassionate, and He He understands. I don't know how hard-headed we are. So, I mean, any other thoughts or questions on this? This is so good. It's so essential to our faith to understand this. And
Did you see that Exodus movie they've got out?
I did not. Did anyone
I
see
haven't
it?
seen. Is it good?
I saw it. It was very entertaining.
It wasn't.
Was it very? I know, but I always
Yeah.
hesitate to see stuff like
I
that because
know.
I'm like, it's not going to be like
Well, I think that what I really enjoyed about it, there's a couple things that were obviously very,
right.
very wrong. But what
Of
I
course.
enjoyed about it were the plagues, actually. They made the plagues very real. And what I mean by that is, like, you'd be sitting there having a meeting and there's just flies everywhere. And I'm sitting in the theater like, you know, so they really did a good job of really getting the
Giving you a
nastiness.
visual.
Yeah, and so that part I think they did really well.
Well, I love how it came out while we're studying this. And the same way with Noah, we were studying it, and then it came out. So you really know the truth, and you know the true story, and you kind of
Was
compare.
Noah any good?
No.
Okay, so don't see that.
Can I think it is entertaining?